screen starts glowing and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the is a good score.
Hey listeners, welcome back to part 2 of our discussion of the X trilogy. We have already discussed X and Pearl, both released in 2022. And now we are going to pick up our conversation with the third of these movies, entitled MaXXXine from 2024. So, whereas we kind of talked about this as we were introducing and going through X and Pearl, those two came out in rapid succession and they were filmed pretty much one after the other. This one came out a little bit later. The production was a little bit separated. And I think you see that in a bunch of different ways. And we'll talk about some of those, but whereas Pearl was a prequel to X, MaXXXine is a sequel to X. So it comes after X. I would say like a year or two. I don't know if we get, oh wait, no, we do get it. What am I saying? We get a timeline. So what year is this one take place?
I think it's 1985.
Right. So it's actually several years after X. What we see is MaXXXine, who survived X, is still a adult video star, but she is trying to make it as a real actress. So this film is about her trying to make it as a quote unquote real actress. And I think the movie maybe has some thoughts about what that even means, or at least challenges us to think about what that means to even be a real actress.
Yeah. Like I have questions about what happens immediately in the aftermath of Pearl. I have questions what happens in the immediate aftermath of X.
So that's what I was going to ask you, Brian. What do you think does happen in the 6 years here?
So the first movie that she made didn't go anywhere. It stayed on that table, probably ended up as evidence or something. And as we find in this film, at least somebody managed to get a copy. But that wasn't her breakout. And I would think, if you are the final girl in a slasher movie, what you do after you get out of that situation is you go to the police and be like, hey, there was a mass murderer, and, worst comes to worst, maybe I had to, shoot him or blow him up or whatever you got to do. But, I would think that's defensible. And just, because people are going to ask, people are going to wonder, you went into the woods with 5 people, presumably at least some of them have families or parties that will come looking. So you're going to have to account for that time and what happened. So I don't know. I mean, easy enough to assume that she's a beautiful woman who is open to this sort of thing, actively pursuing a career in adult film. She is able to find those opportunities and seize them. But I don't know. It was just the movie that we saw in X was not the breakout.
Right. So we do get a few hints in MaXXXine, but they're just hints. And I think the movie is willing to hand wave away too many of the challenging questions about the logistics of her being a part of, let's just say a part of a rather brutal and headline-worthy crime, and still using the same name, the same stage name, and in the same career, and nobody seems to know this about her, really. That's what's kind of odd. It's
it's like nobody knows what happened to her.
Right. So what are some of the hints we get? Well, one is, yes, so the video that they made, we later see a copy of it in MaXXXine, and it has as the opening title frame or whatever, it's like police evidence or something like that when she hits play on it. So this got stashed somewhere in the police archive. So I guess, yeah, the police had a copy and someone else got their hands on it, which we'll talk about that in a bit here. And yet she doesn't, I don't know, like maybe she didn't go to the police because she's worried she'd be a suspect. Maybe like it's a trauma thing and she's like, doesn't want to face it. Maybe she just wants to move past it, you know? I kind of see it as being in line with her ethos of like sheer force of will. No matter what gets in her way, she's only going to push forward, you know? And so like, she's not letting that incident, which would be like the single most traumatic and noteworthy thing that would happen to pretty much anyone, be the thing that defines her. She's still going to be a star, you know? But yeah, and then so a couple other things. So we do here in like I actually didn't remember this, but I caught it when I watched this again, is that so one of the characters, her friends, is a pretty obviously gay video store owner. He's black. And he says, I think it's him. I don't think it's the agent. I think it's him. Like basically, when I helped you off the streets, blank. And so like she probably had a rough couple of years before she kind of settled into a groove. But now she does seem to be in a groove. She's got like seems like steady work as an adult actress. And she also does some like live peep show type stuff, it seems. And yet the film opens with her doing an audition for a quote unquote real movie. So I don't know. I don't know what happened in those 6 years, but we've jumped into the future, which mainly means we're in the 80s now, Brian. Gone is the grungy Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1970s. We're now in the glitzy Miami Vice cocaine 1980s.
I liked seeing the video store.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some cool settings here. And notable, we are not at the house. We are not at the farm that we had seen in the first two movies. We are now squarely in LA, which disappointed me at first, but I don't really know how they could have had another movie there, you know? And if it was going to be MaXXXine, there's just no way it would be back at the same place. So I guess it had to be somewhere else. It's like we're going to follow through on the characters and the themes more so than the setting, which was one of the uniting things between X and Pearl.
Right, but it's still about movie history and making movies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this one is the most about making movies out of the three. I mean, I guess the first one, they were making an adult video. It was like the main incident, you know, but this one is like squarely about movie making, and that being the backdrop for a serial killer, because that's kind of the narrative here. Is there is a serial killer hunting down adult actresses in LA, and many of them have connections to MaXXXine, and so she's kind of always right on the edge of being in danger. The movie wants us to think, basically from the start, that MaXXXine is being hunted down, and indeed, it turns out that she is being hunted down, which we learned before too long. But I don't know. Any other thoughts on the setup of this one, the how we get there before we start talking through the plot, Brian?
No, not really. I think we can jump into it.
So like we said, it's 1985. It's 6 years later. And the headlines are abuzz with discussion of the Night Stalker, who is a serial killer. I don't know. Sometimes, like in these movies, they're based off of a real serial killer. Brian, did you know, was this one based off a real serial killer?
Well, Ramirez is I think his name was Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. And I wasn't sure if maybe they were going to do like an alternate history thing where they have it be somebody else, like actually Ramirez was framed or something, and it's somebody involved in these events. But yeah, no, at the end, they catch him and they show that, Richard Let me make sure that I'm getting that name right.
Yeah, Richard Ramirez.
Okay, I know my serial killers. But so what he would do is he would like break into people's houses and attack women, and usually he would like strangle them. So like multiple of them, he would like grab a lamp in the room and strangle them with the cord. So like none of the things that we were seeing here were fitting Night Stalker MO. So I guess it was just the idea that like serial killers are celebrities in this era. And that's part of like the culture, is that you go and do these things and you get gory celebrity. That was my takeaway.
And so the opening scene, well, the very first thing we see is a home video clip of young MaXXXine. And do you remember what she's doing in this very opening clip, Brian?
She's dancing, right?
Yeah, she's not just dancing. She's doing that fuck-ass dance, as I called it. A replica of the Pearl dance from the Pearl audition. So another thing tying MaXXXine and Pearl together. But she's a little kid there. And we hear a father's voice encouraging her. And we know from X that MaXXXine's father is a preacher, like a televangelist type, you know. But then we immediately cut to, again, one of the uniting things is a door opening dramatically that perhaps obfuscates the aspect ratio a little bit. And she's doing an audition for a quote unquote real movie, but it's like a sequel to what we gather to be kind of exploitative horror film. Like the kind of movie that many movie fans would not call a real movie, you know, like a cheesy sequel to that looks to be a cash grab for like a Exorcist type film, you know.
That's a good call. I was trying to think like what specific sequel should we take this to be? Like, is this Leprechaun 2? But I think Exorcist 2 is probably a good hallmark.
But I don't think we are to take the original. So it's called Puritan 2. And I don't think we're to take it to be quite so big as The Exorcist, although like controversial, kind of like The Exorcist.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, genius calling it Puritan and Puritan 2, not just because it, like the movie itself has religious imagery in it, but obviously these films are kind of in conversation with the themes of like puritanicalism and when is that healthy and how that kind of relates to our own violent and sexual impulses and stuff. So
right. And I'm thinking the last couple minutes about the Night Stalker thing, and I believe he did incorporate like satanic imagery. So definitely there's satanic panic at work here.
Yeah, so that's another thing I was thinking is this ties together a lot of things that we've talked about on the goods before. We talked about satanic panic, right? Did we?
I feel like we must have.
What was satanic panic in?
What was the episode?
I don't know. Maybe we talked about it offline, but I'm pretty sure we talked about it in some episode. What was it? Was it in when we talked about Dungeons and Dragons with Tom Hanks? Maybe. I don't know.
Possibly so. Mazes and Monsters.
Yeah. But another thing is the concept that a big movie star could get their break in a cheap horror sequel is another thing we've talked about recently, Brian. We talked about that like last week. So who were some of the examples you brought up where this has actually been a path to stardom?
Yeah, so I said Matthew McConaughey in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4, and I said Paul Rudd, Halloween 6, Jennifer Aniston, Leprechaun 1, so not quite the same thing.
But it's definitely happened. I brought up Will Ferrell appeared in the Death Artist, the made-for-TV version of Bucket of Blood by Roger Corman.
I wonder how many people saw that one.
According to Letterboxd, not too many. And the person making this film is actually a woman. The character's name is Elizabeth Bender, and she's played by Elizabeth Debicki, who I just find her to be one of the most striking looking actresses. She's like very tall and lanky and kind of has a pointed look. I think I first saw her in The Great Gatsby, and then she's shown up in a bunch of stuff since then. And I believe she is not American. Yeah, she is Australian. And she kind of is taking this film like almost too seriously. It's like kind of a point of comedy that she's like a super intense artist. It's not method. Method is when you're the actor. I don't know what you call it when you're like super in the zone as a director. You know, like think about what people would say about James Cameron in Titanic being like a dictator on the movie set.
Right, yeah, perfectionist like Kubrick waiting for clouds or whatever in Apocalypse Now.
Which is all kind of funny because it's a little bit, I mean, it's Puritan too. It's a sequel to a horror movie. That's pretty obviously a cash-in.
Yeah, it has me thinking of Ed Wood. You're wasting your life making shit and nobody cares.
Wait, what is that from again?
Ed Wood, it's what Sarah Jessica Parker says.
Oh, right. But we cared, Brian.
Good movie. Not the last you'll hear about Ed Wood this month.
I guess now I could put it anywhere, but now I'll bring up something that I actually just read recently about MaXXXine, which I did not know prior to this week, which is that Ty West, he made the first film X, and he wanted to call Pearl XX, and then the third movie XXX.
I think I saw a movie called XXX.
Yeah, well, there's the Vin Diesel, is that who it was?
Yeah.
It was like a knockoff Fast and Furious, right?
Kind of. He was an action guy. I actually didn't see it. I saw the trailer, but Triple X, that was like his alias.
Right. Of course, that is also often a euphemism for pornography. And that, of course, plays into this story as well. So I don't know if I would have liked the movies more if they were called X, XX, and XXX. That seems a little silly now that I say it, but it's also kind of minimalist and cool, so I don't quite know. But yeah, so we have this audition, and we learn pretty quickly that she gets the part, because kind of like the audition in Pearl, it's almost like it comes out of nowhere, like this kind of super intense energy coming from the person on stage in this audition. Because, I mean, yeah, this is a mirror to the end of Pearl, which the end of Pearl had an audition that totally bombed. And here it goes right. So we also have a mirror to that here too. But the rest of the movie kind of takes place as she's preparing for the making of this film and trying to dodge this serial killer, but then also getting kind of sucked into this path involving this private investigator who is, I mean, I don't know if we know for certain that he's working for the killer. I think it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly, because whenever we're seeing the serial killer, we only see, I'll go ahead and say his, although I was wondering the first time I watched if they was going to do some sort of like gender surprise on the killer, but we see his gloves, black gloves. That's how we know we're looking at the serial killer.
Yeah, he's all wrapped in black leather like Judge Doom in Roger Rabbit. Like emphasis on that he's all covered up. So yeah, could be anybody.
Because so we don't know who he is because because we don't see anything of him except just these gloves. Although I did think it was interesting that like we always see him like stretching out his leather hands, and like leather is kind of like a kink sex thing sometimes. Yeah. And so it's kind of playing up that imagery.
Well, the first time that we see him, he's watching the Peep Show, right?
I think so, yeah. So that adds to that as well. So this whole rest of this movie is like in Hollywood and then also like on movie sets. So there's just this really weird and kind of intense movie imagery throughout. It's like we're kind of half in a movie at all times. Did you sort of get that sensation, Brian?
I guess so. I mean, we're in a movie the whole time also because it's a movie.
Well, you know.
You're right. I mean, I thought it was cool how much we actually see the sound stages and stuff. Especially, we'll get to the ending later, but like that was nuts.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I say that it feels like it's kind of in a movie is like it's constantly, I don't know, I just felt like this one really messily but enthusiastically plays up the themes that were kind of established in X and Pearl, like how movies are at their core, the whole kiss kiss bang bang thing that I've talked about before. Like they are violence and sex. Like that is why we go see films, you know? And like that's kind of at the root of why we've always gone to see spectacle, you know? And to me, like this gets played up in a bunch of strange ways. One is at one point we have kind of a stereotypical scene where someone corners MaXXXine in an alleyway, and the guy who corners her and is clearly has sexual violence on his mind is Buster Keaton. Like he's wearing a Buster Keaton outfit and he looks a little like Buster Keaton. And like, I don't know why you do that except to just kind of play with the imagery of movies. This guy suffers a pretty rough fate though. He has some genital injury by MaXXXine.
Oh, don't beat around the bush. He stomps on his testicles with a high heel and it explodes.
It's brutal.
Very gnarly.
Yeah. It's kind of like what happens to Pearl's head at the end of X, which I think she even points out.
Right, because she's having like flashbacks of X moments.
So one thing they do is as part of her preparation for her movie, she has to get like this mold of her face. And so like the way that they do this, apparently, I don't know if this is real or not, but they like put on this gloop completely covering her face. They're like, oh, don't forget to breathe. And I was like, how is she going to breathe?
Well, they'll usually put a straw in the nose.
Okay.
That goes out through the goop. We did this on Gauntlet.
Oh, you did?
On our Bucket of Blood episode.
Oh, nice. And it's like while she's covered in the gloop that she starts to have her flashbacks. Although she's probably been having them the whole time. But there's kind of a sort of cadence here where one of MaXXXine's friends, also another adult actress, will be murdered by whoever this man in the leather gloves is. So a few things about this serial killer. The PI that he hires to follow around MaXXXine, again, it doesn't take us too long to realize this PI is connected with the serial killer going around, is played by Kevin Bacon. What did you think of this, Brian? Did you enjoy him here?
Yeah, but also, like, he gets it bad. I think kind of disproportionately bad. So, I mean, unless we take him to be the killer, like, she really is rough with him. I mean, he's hounding her, but it's in the name of, hey, you, like, killed people and never told anybody about it. And what happened on the farm.
Oh, I mean, I think it's much more threatening than that. He's got like a gun and chasing her around and like trying to subdue her. And like there's a serial killer around. Like even if, I don't know. I thought her life was in danger this whole time. Although yes, she does get a little carried away with him. But he's kind of a sleazy and he's got this like Louisiana accent and this mustache. It's kind of a fun, slightly hammy performance from Kevin Bacon.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got this white suit he wears a couple of times, which again had me thinking of Miami Vice. These big glasses too, greasy hair. Another couple of characters we have around are these two sort of bumbling detectives. I feel like in most movies, these detectives would have been the star of the film, you know, like the buddy cops mismatched trying to figure out who the killer is.
They reminded me of the agents in Chasing Liberty, the pair that was going around, you know, after Mandy Moore, but they're like flirting with each other.
Yeah, they got a little bit of like history. It's not clear exactly what it is, but well, because he's also like a fake tough guy and she's calling him on it. And it's because he's a failed actor. And so this is kind of his outlet, is like being the bad cop and like messing with the suspects and the people they're trying to get details from. I thought I laughed every time they had some exchange, because you'll get like a sort of routine bad cop, you know, tough cop routine from him. And, you know, MaXXXine will leave the scene and then the other agent. So these two agents, they're played by Bobby. I don't know how you say this guy's name. Cannavale, I think. Bobby Cannavale or something like that. And I had heard of this guy before. I knew he was like a TV star. I don't know if I had seen him in any movies, but like he's kind of a aged TV star, like a former sitcom type guy from the 2000s. And then did you recognize the woman detective, Brian?
No, you got to jog me.
It's Michelle Monaghan from Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which is a phrase I already used. We talked about the movie Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and she's the female lead from that film.
Oh, wow.
But here, I mean, she's kind of, you know, got like detective sunglasses on. I don't know if I would have recognized her if I hadn't seen the name in the credits. Another character I like, we talked about the movie store clerk, and this is a character named Leon. The actor's name is Moses Sumney. And yeah, I would want to go hang out in this movie store, Brian. It seemed like a very interesting movie. They had like all sorts of VHSs, and he like clearly knew his stuff, and he had like gadgets hanging around and stuff in there.
Yeah, I feel like they were waiting to set this set up.
Yeah.
It's another window into the film industry, a period in time.
It's like the early VHS era, right? I don't know. When did VHSs come into play?
Yeah, I mean, definitely relatively early. If I said they had VHSs by 1978, I think that would be accurate. But definitely, like, at this point, they're widely adopted and they're the cutting edge.
Let's see. According to Wikipedia, the first VCRs came out in 1976. So yeah, so this is okay. So they've been around for a while. So like the video store, at least in Hollywood, you know, you got a lot of movie fans, probably pretty well established concept. And the agent, Brian, who plays her agent? She's got like this interesting and very loyal agent.
Right. So he's played by Giancarlo Esposito, and I couldn't quite put my finger on where I'd seen him before.
I was thinking of you, Brian. So I was like, I'm pretty sure this is one of the Breaking Bad guys.
It's Gus from Breaking Bad. Actually, I thought this performance was one of the few times he's not, like, reprising the role of Gus. Like, he shows up on, The Boys, basically playing Gus. He was on Mandalorian, basically playing Gus, where it's like he's a villain, but he's very like understated and stoic.
Mm-hmm.
Here he gets to cheese a little bit.
Yeah, that was kind of my impression too. It's like, because was he in did he show up in Community for a while or something like that?
Yes, he was in Community a little bit. For some reason in the later seasons of Community, there's a lot of Breaking Bad overlap.
Interesting. And I feel like, yeah, he usually gives off like the very kind of serious energy, and you're right, he's kind of goofy here. Fun character. So another way that it just kind of feels like the movies are kind of like overtaking the world is, like I mentioned, there's a couple of chase scenes that happen on the studio lot, or like interesting things that happen on the studio lot. And one of them is when this PI is tracking down MaXXXine. The Kevin Bacon character is chasing down MaXXXine, and they go to the Bates Motel set. And so like now her life has become a horror movie in this way, Brian. I don't know. I just thought this was like very striking that we're literally having like a mid-film chase scene at the Bates Motel.
Yeah, that was interesting. It's like on the Universal lot. And they mentioned that they had just recently made a Psycho sequel, I guess, even in 1985. I do know that like Anthony Perkins continued to play Norman Bates in subsequent movies that I have not seen. But in the first one, X, they talked about Psycho highly. The camera guy says that he's a fan of Psycho.
That's right.
And also kind of holds it up as like maybe the first elevated horror.
That's an interesting point. I had forgotten that they talked about Psycho back in X. So that's another connection. That's pretty cool. So MaXXXine gets delivered a video copy of the movie that was shot during X. And so now she's kind of, the demons from her past are coming back to her. And that's when she starts to get kind of panicky. But it kind of comes at an inopportune time because she's just about to start making her Puritan 2 movie. And the director character, Elizabeth Debicki, is known for being like impatient with people who are not fully locked in. Like, oh, you have to give a great performance. And if you do, she'll always be loyal to you, but she'll kick you out if your head's not in the game. It's like the kind of pep speech that characters give to her. And so eventually MaXXXine determines, okay, I need to sort out this dude who's chasing after me. And this comes after like multiple of her friends, including Leon. Leon really got me. I was sad that we lost Leon. It was otherwise all women. I guess the idea is like the industry chews up women is kind of generally the theme, but that it was also like the one major black character and the one major gay character felt like it kind of fit in that area as well. People that the industry are not particularly nice to, you know?
Yeah, I was actually kind of wondering, you mentioned there is a little of the element of who is the killer going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if it might be MaXXXine herself somehow doing this, because all the people that are dying are people who know MaXXXine, and like how many other people would know these people because they're kind of all on the fringes.
Oh yeah, that thought definitely crossed my mind too.
And we see her doing violence.
Right. Yeah. And at least up until Leon, the first couple ones are like all ostensibly competitors of hers. The one reason I thought it might not have been is because like she seemed like she wanted to be getting out of the adult world. Although maybe that could have been like purging her past demons or something like that. But like the idea that she would be killing her competitors and like the people who thought they could trust her and be open with her and stuff. I don't know. I thought that might have been kind of interesting. The other one that I was curious about was the director character, the Elizabeth Debicki, was if it was going to be someone that we had met, maybe it was going to be her. Because then it's like kind of literalizing the violence to some extent. I don't quite know what purpose that would have served, but I thought that would have been an interesting one as well. So this kind of comes to a head when MaXXXine pulls in Giancarlo Esposito, her agent, and is like, I think the Kevin Bacon guy is going to be chasing me around. Goes to a club, and if sure enough, Kevin Bacon is chasing her around, and he's kind of drunk, and he's messy, and he thinks that he's cornered her. And I liked the scene leading up to what ultimately happens to this Kevin Bacon character here. Before we get to that, I really like this scene. It's like a nightclub chase, which had me thinking very much of The Terminator, which has a prominent scene in a nightclub. Terrific film. Have you seen the original Terminator, Brian?
I've only seen Terminator 2.
That was me for a long time, but last year I was like, you know what? I'm just going to watch Terminator. Or it might have been 2 years ago. And it's really good. I actually think it's better than Terminator 2. I don't know where. I guess it's like not quite so warm and four quadrant as Terminator 2, which has kind of like a very sentimental underbelly that's not there in Terminator. But I really like it. I recommend it.
Yeah, I should definitely see it. And now that I think about it, I've actually also seen Terminator 4 and I think 5. Genesis was the name of it. I saw that one.
To be honest, I lost track after Cameron left. I know there's like 3 or 4 since Terminator 2. One was just Terminator 3, and then I think they stopped numbering them, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, yeah, so I saw Salvation and Genesis, which I think were 4 and 5, and then they had one with, like, old Sarah Connor in it. Dark Fate, maybe? 6? Terminator Dark Fate, I think.
Sure. Maybe I'll watch them all someday. Another thing it had me thinking of was Blade Runner, which has a masterful scene that's a nightclub chase down. But just when it seems like Kevin Bacon's kind of caught her, she gets the upper hand. Basically, he comes outside and someone who's working with MaXXXine and the agent clocks him on the head. And then one of the more brutal kills of this trilogy, Brian. I don't know what the most brutal kills, like what I would put at the top of the the heap, because there's some gnarly violence in these 3 films, but this one definitely had me squirming a little bit. So, do you want to describe it?
She puts him in a car crusher. I guess they collectively put him in a car crusher.
Right. So he's unconscious. They tie him up in his car. He's kind of got like this, it's like an Oldsmobile or Cadillac, kind of like an 80s pimp car type thing. And yeah, they put it in a junkyard car crusher. And when he wakes up and realizes what it is, he starts panicking and pleading for his life, and nobody has any mercy. They turn it on, and sure enough, he gets crushed. And then you see blood spilling out of the door as the car gets crushed down into just a few inches tall. Pretty brutal. I was trying to remember. I know there was a scene in that movie Will made us watch. Maybe his very first appearance, the Tokyo Drifter, that was in a junkyard. But I couldn't remember what it was. Was it like a car melter, or was it a car crusher?
Oh, geez, I can't even remember. I remember that movie having colorful rooms. That's about it.
Yeah. Some colorful rooms in MaXXXine, too. Come join the Discord, listeners, thegoodsfilmpodcast.com. And I'm sure Will tell us what scene we're thinking of, and maybe he'll even link to it on YouTube for us. And so MaXXXine pieces together that her friends, before they had died, had been inviting her to go to this swanky party up in Hollywood Hills. So I don't really know like the neighborhoods of Hollywood, Brian, but I imagine this as like the place where the party in Mulholland Drive happened or something like that. Like the fancy, highest up mansions looking down over the rest of the city, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so she goes to this party, and she does correctly deduce that this is where the killer is. And the killer is actually her father, the televangelist guy that we've seen in X and now seen again here. And the general idea is that he is so distraught at his daughter becoming a adult actress, running away for the promiscuous showbiz life, that he is going to perform like a lethal exorcism or something on tape. Basically, he's like killing the people who are kind of involved in all of this. And we learned that he's kind of been filming his murders as like snuff films, basically. And I guess his idea is like feels like he's doing some service to God to purge out all of this evil, culminating with his daughter. So I thought this was really interesting and kind of like a big messy swing. Like it seemed implausible that her father would be able to pull all of this off. But I also thought it was really interesting in like heightening what the movie was doing conceptually. And also just being like a cool wow type twist. Like not what I predicted, but also kind of an interesting payoff.
Yeah, they really tried to keep everything like connected to what came before. So 1, 2, and 3 have things tying them together.
And this ties back to what happens in the closing clip of X, where we first learn that Maxine's dad is the televangelist that has been kind of on the TV throughout that film, talking about how he lost his daughter to sin, and that daughter is, of course, MaXXXine. And so this is kind of payoff on that as like a true murder mystery, which is just kind of interesting, you know? I've learned a lot of people really do not like this third act, though. They think it's like a dumb twist. And what this movie becomes is less of like a Hollywood satire and more of like a, I don't know, satanic cult mystery type thing that just doesn't feel in line with the rest of the film. But I thought it did feel in line. I thought it worked pretty well. I don't know.
I did see that one of the top reviews on Letterboxd was, "I will not accept a third act I do not deserve." But I wasn't sure if that meant the third act of the movie or that this whole film is the third act of the trilogy.
Oh, interesting.
They were dunking on the whole movie.
I could see that. That's interesting. Like third act of the trilogy, yeah. And then throughout all this, it's like right next to the Hollywood sign. They're like doing chases around the Hollywood sign and really just kind of heightening that this is all about the monstrosity of show business.
Yeah. I like they had so much happen at the Hollywood sign, but also they talk about like the Black Dahlia. And so another, famous murder in Hollywood, tying that in with the Night Stalker and all of that. This theme of barbarity under the surface of Hollywood.
Yeah. And of course, that is very Mulholland Drive. The Black Dahlia, I didn't know that actually was in Hollywood. They mentioned her they mentioned the Black Dahlia pretty early in the film. So I guess that's another tease to get us thinking about whether this killer is actually a woman.
So the Black Dahlia was the murder victim.
Oh.
Not the killer. She was a woman who was found cut in half, and they never figured out who did it. And there's some theories about various, kind of like Jack the Ripper. Oh, well, he had medical knowledge, so maybe this dude.
That's kind of rough. Sorry, Black Dahlia.
And the whole time, Dan was hunting for female suspects. Also, she had the Glasgow smile, the lips cut, like Joker.
Okay, well, that Black Dahlia sounds like someone who would actually be a serial killer.
You're right. That's true.
But she was the victim. Okay, so I'm pulling this up now.
Elizabeth Smart, I believe, was the name of the person.
Elizabeth Short. Elizabeth Smart. Wasn't that someone else who got
I think it was
abducted?
A kidnapping victim.
Yeah. Her case became highly publicized owing to the gruesome nature of the crime, which included the mutilation of her corpse, which was bisected at the waist. Well, that's real neat.
I'm halved.
So what are some big serial killer movies you've seen, Brian?
Well, is every slasher movie a serial killer movie?
Oh, now there's an interesting question.
Or do you mean ones that are based on real life cases?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I feel like serial killer movie, that is a known thing.
Okay, so Seven is a serial killer movie, but not a slasher movie.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Maybe you could count like the Dr. Phibes, Vincent Price movies. 2 of those.
Definitely Silence of the Lambs.
Oh yeah. Good one. If you count the other Hannibals, then there's Red Dragon and Hannibal. I have not seen Manhunter. I got to watch Manhunter someday.
Prisoners, the Denis Villeneuve movie, is kind of a serial killer movie.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff, and there's of course ones based on true cases as well.
Right.
I don't think there's that much of a distinction. Where would you draw the line? What separates a slasher? What makes a slasher distinct, or what makes the serial killer films that you're thinking of distinct?
Well, when I think of a slasher is like a single killing spree, and I was going to say usually not a mystery who the killer is, but I guess that's not true. Like Scream. I don't know. It's like some serial killer movies are slashers, I guess, and some slashers are kind of serial killer movies. I don't know. Halloween, is that a serial killer movie? I mean, it's about a guy who kills multiple people, but when I think of a serial killer movie, to me, it's like there is someone who is killing a lot of people who needs to be stopped, you know?
Yeah, I think as we've been talking, I think that's key, is like there's a possibility that they will be captured by like standard law enforcement. Like a detective will figure out what's going on and bring this person in. Whereas in the slashers, sometimes they are like a monster. At least by the time that there are sequels, they've like transcended mortality.
And it's really, they're less about, I don't know. I think most slashers, if you kind of think of Halloween as sort of setting the template, it's like the villain is like as much like a force as like as a actual character. And So when I think of, you said standard law enforcement, I actually think some of them are not standard law enforcement. Like in Prisoners, for example, it's Hugh Jackman as a dad hunting down. And there are cops. Jake Gyllenhaal plays the cop in that one, I guess. So maybe that is there. And then I guess in MaXXXine, you have the cops. But like the main person we're following is MaXXXine, trying to avoid and then ultimately take down this killer. But yeah. I haven't seen Zodiac. You saw Zodiac, right?
Yeah, that was pretty good. So that was a true case. It has the guy who played one of the McDonald brothers in The Founder, the one who wasn't Nick Offerman, who is the guy that is like, he's probably the Zodiac, but we can't officially say that he is because it's never been figured out. But like, that's the guy that they point to and say, yeah, look closer at this dude.
Gotcha. So they kind of set MaXXXine up for this climactic violent scene. The detectives show up. I can't remember why. I think they're maybe tailing MaXXXine. And MaXXXine gets all tied up. They're about to do some sort of ritual on her that they're going to film. But the detectives intervene and MaXXXine escapes and there's like bullets flying and there's one interesting effect. It's like near a pool in this mansion, this Hollywood mansion. And like people are getting shot and falling into the pool. And then their blood is like kind of floating upwards. It's a very creepy and unusual effect. And then finally MaXXXine makes it out and ends up face to face with her dad. And he pleads for his life. And she repeats the mantra, "I will not accept a life I do not deserve," which for her means I'm going to kill my dad because he's baggage on me, you know? And she's got like, when she shoots him, it's not just a bullet, his whole head explodes. I don't know if she's got like I don't know, what are like some of the super powerful guns or something like that? It's a gruesome shot to the head.
Yeah, whatever Dirty Harry has, or maybe she's got hollow point bullets or something.
And then we cut to the denouement of the film 1 month later. And she has indeed made the Puritan 2 movie. And it's a hit because of the story of her being a survivor of a serial killer and taking him down makes her famous. So it's kind of like she didn't really get it on her own. It's like because of the other stuff, sort of, that she's famous. It's all her father gave it to her. She's a Nepo baby. Exactly. So I thought that was kind of an interesting like twist. It's like, she did make it, but did she make it? Because it's only because of the other stuff that she made it, you know? Mm-hmm. Because she escaped murder, because she was hunted down. And I don't know, do you think, were we supposed to take that this was like actually an artistically compelling film and that it was actually a good performance by her? Or is it just like exploitation that people were morbidly curious about? Yeah, hard to say. I mean, think about the real world. Like, people would definitely be like reading this Wikipedia article and like talking about her the way that we are talking about the Black Dahlia or the Night Stalker, perhaps. Right. And if then she was then the star of a movie, yeah, that would be pretty crazy. Oh, and then to make things even more meta, at the end of the movie, she's getting ready to make her own life story as a movie, which of course we have just seen as a movie. So it starts to get a little bit meta, almost Scream-like. Like in the Screams, they have the movies that are called Stab. But those are just Scream as we know it, except it's in universe, you know? Yeah, I was thinking about Stab when she was running around the psycho house. Because they do all kinds of stuff in the Screams where they're making a movie, and this house is a set of my house. And yeah, that got really strange. And the final shot is another Mia Goth staring at the camera, except instead of the end of Pearl, where she's like got the creepy big smile, eyes watering because she's barely blinking, looking right at the camera for an extended take. This is like a prop head of Mia Goth. I think the shot itself is probably actually Mia Goth. I don't know for sure, but it looks so much like her. But I guess that's what they're good at, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this whole thing has got to be some kind of digital composition.
Yeah. But it's her fake severed head from the movie Puritan 2 staring at the film. So staring at the camera. So again, just like really heightening and exaggerating all these themes that the movie's kind of set up. I kind of like, it's very uncommon for a third movie to be the best. And I don't think this is the best, but if you're not going to be the best, at least be the wildest. And I feel like this is pretty easily the wildest out of the three. Like, it does the weirdest stuff. It pushes the most boundaries and like plays up its themes and stuff the most. So I don't know. What's your overall reaction to MaXXXine, Brian?
It was kind of all over the place. It wasn't my favorite of the three. But this last shot was really, really cool because it starts out in close up on the prop head and then pulls back to the warehouse door on this soundstage and then keeps pulling back and pulling up like you would see at the end of a lot of movies, like a crane shot or something, a big jib. But then it just keeps pulling out and pulling out and pulling out until it's like all of Los Angeles and like Google Earth. So yeah, somehow they digitally composited this, but it's like very seamless and pretty cool.
That's a great point. It's not just the head, it's this other stuff too. And that it's like, because you kind of get, as it happens, a view of all of Hollywood. Like you see the Hollywood sign, although I think they've, as like almost the title card drop, they've changed it to MaXXXine, MaXXXine. Is that the same number of letters as Hollywood? HOLLYWOOD. No, it's not.
I think Hollywood is longer.
But anyways, yeah. So I feel like we've talked a lot about like what are the threads that unite this movie, that unite this trilogy. And I think it's interesting how it manages to come at the same themes from like so many different angles. But so that kind of makes it all feel like a whole. Obviously, the fact that it's Mia Goth makes it feel unified. But what are your thoughts, Brian, in terms of how these movies manage to kind of be their own individual things, but also be a trilogy? Does it really feel like they're united to you?
Well, they're kind of each trying to be a unique moment in time and like evoke a film style, sometimes of a time period that is different from that time period. So it's kind of unusual. And they're all trying to be different from one another, but they're united. Obviously, they got the same star, but there's just like a conscious effort to not be the same from film to film.
Right. They all have very different tones. But they're all they all have a somewhat of a comic element to them. Like almost like a kind of over the topness to them that has some comedy in it. I think Pearl is the funniest of the three, but I think all of them have some dark comedy in them. Even if it's just someone's eye getting stabbed through a hole in the barn door or whatever that was, like almost an outrageousness to it, which we talked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't, it's funny. I've read that is it Tobe or Toby Hooper?
I've heard Toby, but yeah, strange name spelling. Because
it's Tobe, and I assumed it was Toby. But also, like, my head sees, if you see an E at the end of something, you assume it's just, like, silent,
Yeah, maybe he's being tricky, like Topher for Chris Topher.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, or, like, Tom York is the lead singer of Radiohead. And I'm pretty sure it's short for Thomas. I'm not 100% sure. but he's like, I'm Tom, and he spells it THOM, which is like psychopath behavior to me, but I don't know. And so I guess another question is, what happens after MaXXXine? She's a movie star now. I read a couple of interviews with Ty West since MaXXXine came out, and most directors, it's got to be like a business negotiation or like non-disclosure thing. Like, they'll never directly answer, are you going to make another movie and what do you want it to be about? Like, they'll just always dodge that question. And he kind of dodges, but he leaves open the possibility of a fourth movie. So I wonder, Brian, what's left to make? If there was a fourth MaXXXine movie, what would it be about? Like, what era would it be? I think it'd have to be early 90s. I don't know, early mid 90s.
Or do we get Pearl 2?
Oh, interesting.
I feel like you could have, we were talking about what if they had made a second one called XX, and that got me thinking about the movie X2, which is the second X-Men movie, and they did a trilogy of those, and then a little bit later they did another trilogy, but it was like the original actors were getting old, and then they got new actors, and then it was like flashback, they got more inventive with the timeline. And they had the X-Men First Class and Days of Future Past where they had both groups of actors. And so, I don't know, that may not be anything, but I just wanted to bring up X2. I don't know, but another thing that unites the three movies in the X trilogy is you don't know what happens after the curtain falls. It's like, okay, where do they go from here?
Right. The character is in a state of uncertainty. I feel like that's often true in horror movies. It's like they've just kind of barely survived the ordeal. So what happens next? But I think you're right that especially in these ones, there's like a sort of anxiety about what comes next.
I bet there's going to be a Puritan 3.
Seems likely.
She may not be in it, but it will happen.
So I just Googled whether there's going to be a fourth MaXXXine. And Google has helpfully provided me with an AI overview, which I don't know if we can trust, but apparently his most recent update is that Ty West said that he's happy with where he left it. And MaXXXine is likely the end of the series. But also earlier this year, he said that he had plans for a fourth film, but it might not be his next project. So I don't know. We'll see. I would be curious what he would come up with. Could he keep making it a little more outrageous? Because I think one thing I like about the trilogy is each one is a little more outrageous than the last, like a little more just kind of unhinged. And I said messy, but like in a positive sort of way. Like I feel like the trilogy ramps you up on it being increasingly artificial. And so I just kind of wonder where he would go next with that. But I would watch it if he made it. And if not, I think it holds together pretty well as a trilogy, despite, to your point, being three very different tones across three movies. That also had me thinking quite a bit of the original Mad Max movies. Have you seen the original Mad Maxes, Brian?
I haven't.
So they're like completely different films. They're just totally different, to the point that it almost feels disingenuous to call them part of the same series, except that they have like the same lead character. In fact, when Mad Max 2 came out in America, they tried really hard to market it not as Mad Max 2, but as The Road Warrior. So it'd be like The Road Warrior, and then in small text, Mad Max 2 or something like that, so that people would not feel like they had to see the first one. And even if they did, they weren't necessarily expecting it to be like just more of the same or whatever.
Actually, I did have an idea about what they could do in another MaXXXine, which I think they could channel like Jason X, where it's the future. They're all about different time periods. Set one in an era that hasn't happened yet. Tell us what's going to happen next with movies.
Oh, okay. Have you seen Jason X, by the way?
Only part of it.
It's stupid, but I found it more pleasantly stupid than some of the other Friday the 13th, but it's very stupid.
I know somebody gets frozen and smashed.
Yes. With like a liquid nitrogen. That one has got a lot of like, hey, space girlfriend, let's go have some galactic sex together type talk. It's like real cheesy knockoff Star Trek dialogue, but R-rated. But what you just said reminded me, Robert Rodriguez never made the third Machete. The third Machete was going to be called Machete Kills in Space, but he never made it, Brian. I guess there's still time.
Never say never.
But yeah, I could do something like that. Or maybe like when they first build that farmhouse back on X and Pearl farmhouse. Maybe she's got some ancestors or something. I don't know. Mia Goth has done period pieces. She was really good in Emma. What else have I seen her in? I don't know. Probably other stuff. Have you seen her in other stuff?
No, I haven't. I saw a picture at one point of her and Scarlett Johansson together, but I don't know what that movie was.
Oh, you know what? You have seen her in something because she's in Suspiria 2018.
Oh, okay. Yes, I did see that.
I'm about ready to rate. What about you, Brian?
Let's do it.
So Is It Good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating, toward a good, which is an 8 out of 8. So Brian, we'll go back and forth through the 3 movies. Is X from 2022 good?
I liked it. It's really well put together. Like, great cinematography. I think if slasher movies are going to continue getting made, and they obviously will, I think this is a good exercise in the genre. It's kind of a little reflective. And yeah, just good production elements. Especially it's got that theme of the fear of mortality. That's really, like, getting old is the scary thing, not just getting murdered. So I'm going to give it a high 5. What about you, Dan?
And that's good on our Is It Good scale of 5 out of 8. I'm going to go one higher than you. I'm going to give this one a very good. I really liked X. I liked it the first time I watched it back in 2022. I liked it even more this time. My big complaint had been that it just takes so long to actually be a slasher, because it had been pitched to me as like, oh, this is a great slasher. And then like it's over an hour before the slashing starts. And I just kind of felt constantly teased out by it the first time I watched it. When I kind of had that in my head, I didn't feel that at all the second time. I thought it was paced very well. And like, I don't know, maybe I just was vibing more with the non-murder material and thought it was funnier and like more interesting and just beautifully shot in this rural Texas. I don't know if it's actually shot in rural Texas. I don't know, but beautifully shot wherever this location is. That really cool shot of Mia Goth swimming in the lake with the gator right behind her. And I think you said it's reflective. I think that's a good word because it's a little bit meta. One of the bits of feedback I heard on it is, oh, thank goodness they didn't make just another meta slasher. But it kind of is meta. It actually is, because it's about the making of movies. It's about the making of trashy movies. And I mean, it kind of ends with her having made this violent movie that challenges us to think about whether there's any worth in that movie existing. And I don't know. I feel like it's the right amount of meta so that it doesn't rub it in your face, but still makes you think about it itself. And I thought that was interesting. And just some dark humor and funny characters, and they're idiots, but in a charming kind of way. And it's got that late porno chic goofiness that we talked about with Boogie Nights, the synergy with that. A lot of Texas Chainsaw and other homages in it. And the last thing I'll say is that it out of all of them, it's the one that most kind of stands on its own. It's like a polished and obvious, like a 70s movie taking place in the 70s in the style of the 70s, you know? It's like it feels kind of the most cohesive out of the three. So I'm going to give it a strong very good. I quite like this one.
Nice. I was definitely thinking of giving X a 6, but I wasn't sure if I could defend giving Pearl an 8 if I did that, because I really, really liked Pearl, and I'm like right on the cusp of the 7 and the 8. I thought it was really remarkable. I don't know, it was like relatable. The title of the Buzzed on Movies episode was Pearl Did Nothing Wrong. Like, it really makes you feel what she's feeling, and that she's isolated on this farm and there's no way to get out, and then she thinks she sees a way, and it crumbles. I like the colors of everything. And yeah, it just has a weird energy, intensity throughout. I think I'm going to settle on the highest 7. I feel like I give 7s out like candy. I've been given way too many 7s. I don't know if it's an 8. I don't know if it's a masterpiece. But something I've realized is that basically every 8 that I've given for the whole show has been to a movie that I've seen more than once. And I've only seen this one once, so I think I got to watch it again. The only exception to that is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I saw that once and I gave it an 8. But yeah, I really vibed with this one. I'm going to give it a 7. What about you?
So in 2022, I did an exercise where I ranked every new release that came out. And that year I saw, according to this list I'm looking at, 94 new releases. I kind of stopped ranking them sometime in mid 2023 when I had seen most of the heavy hitters. So I know I've seen more than 94. That also includes a couple of shorts. So I've seen a lot of 2022 movies. I have X rated number 19 out of those. And I probably would bump that up a little bit after seeing it most recently. I have Pearl at number 1. I think Pearl is my favorite movie of 2022, Brian. I'm also going to give it a high 7 on the verge of an 8. This is just, it's such a funny movie, but like, it's so interesting because it's got the setting, just kind of an unusual setting, 1919, but not a World War I movie because everyone's off at World War I. But like also you got the Spanish flu coming and it's kind of this rural area. But man, you're right. Everything about the colors and just the sort of melodrama tone and the way that her like awfulness kind of escalates throughout the film, like both her awfulness, both in the sense that she is in an awful scenario and also she does awful things, kind of escalates. And oh my gosh, that performance by Mia Goth is just so good. She just absolutely nails it. It's like so dynamic, and yeah, it's a little funny. Yeah, it's kind of scary and psychopathic. And yeah, it's also just got like this kind of tenderness and humanity to it. Like that's why I think I would not say that Pearl does nothing wrong, but I would say that there is something sympathetic and engaging about her where you're hoping, you know, it's not going to go well when she goes to this audition, but you're hoping. And just some of the scenes are so like instantly iconic to me. The dance, the audition, the stare down at the end, the way that she chases down Mitzi in a single shot and hits her and slices her down with the axe. Absolutely incredible stuff. I think I would be a little more excited about giving it an 8 and would strongly consider it, but I actually feel like it kind of, this is almost like, I feel like I'm being picky. Like I'm not savoring enough what I have, but I feel like it could have gone even harder on some of the interesting choices it makes. Like, okay, just take, for instance, the final shot when she stares at the camera. She does that for like, I don't know, 2 minutes, a minute and a half. And then they kind of does like a sort of, I don't know what you call it, where the screen goes black in a circle around her. And then eventually it cuts her face off. If she had just done that for the entire credits, that just would have been insane. And it could have been so cool. Or like when she has the single shot monologue, but it takes like 2 minutes before it actually commits to being a single shot just on Mia Goth. Like that whole thing could have been a single monologue. And the audition could have been even longer. I don't know. Like, I feel like it not, maybe I didn't pull its punches. I also feel like it abandoned its theme a little bit of like, is she just really angry because she's horny, which it kind of suggests for the first half of the film. But then it's less so in the second half of the film. I felt like there was a little bit of a lost thread there.
It can be two things.
Again, that's like nitpicky stuff because, again, I have it as my favorite movie of 2022. I think it's absolutely terrific. I think it both subverts and upholds some slasher tropes and is its own unique thing. Just very fun. Pearl, 7 out of 8. I know I'm going on long on these, but let's move on to MaXXXine, Brian. Is MaXXXine good?
So anytime that we watch like 3+ movies, I can get a little worn down as we go, and I fear this may suffer from coming off of Pearl, which I really, really liked, and I didn't think it was as good as that. It deserves a 4. I'll go ahead and give it a 4. Like, it's not bad. It carries on a lot of the threads that you might want to see continued from the previous ones. It's got things to say about movie making, and it's set in an interesting period. But it almost doesn't even feel like the same kind of movie as the other two. It's like more of a cop procedural. You said Miami Vice. I have never seen Miami Vice. I just kind of know the color scheme and the aesthetic. But it seems more like a cop show than a horror movie. So I'll settle on a 4, but it's like a lower 4 for me. I don't know. I maybe I didn't get it. But there's some interesting stuff.
It's interesting you say it's a cop show because I feel like the cops are a really small part of it. It's like they show up 3 or 4 times throughout the movie, and then they get killed at the end. Spoiler. I guess we already spoiled the endings of the movie, so I don't need to warn about spoilers. I'm going to give this one a very good. If you had asked me before I rewatched them this week what my ranking was of the 3 movies, I probably would have had MaXXXine ahead of X. I think now I would have X ahead of MaXXXine. I was just a smidge lower on it the second time through, which was the opposite of X, where I was higher on it the second time through. But I think it's really interesting, and it just kind of goes there. It's got all the 80s stuff and just like weird moviness coming in at all edges on it, and like taking the various themes kind of propped up throughout the first 2 films and bringing them to like extreme conclusions. And yeah, it's kind of got a murder mystery, and it's got like a crazy climax, and then like a really good kind of payoff final farewell little vignette of her being famous at the end with that shot of her severed head as the final look that we then zoom out on, like we talked about. I just think it's really interesting and messy in ways that I enjoyed. Again, I'll use that word and in a positive connotation. So I really like all these movies, Brian. I think they're a terrifically fun horror trilogy and are doing stuff in horror tones that I enjoy. So also helps that Mia Goth is just carrying them in the lead. I mean, she's good in all of them. Her performance in Pearl is probably my favorite performance of the 2020s so far, but she's good in all of them. So there we have it. X, Pearl, MaXXXine. Could have been called X, XX, and XXX, but we don't live in that universe, Brian. But we still live in a universe of spooky season. Now, by the time we record the next one, we might be just on the other side of spooky season. But one thing I know about you, Brian, is you like to let spooky season linger on just a little bit. You like to let it decompress a little.
That's right. So you don't get spooky season bends. You got to have some lingering, some dregs. And so what I want us to watch is some more Tim Burton. We've covered some Tim Burton in the past. And it is a Tim Burton alien film. It's Mars Attacks.
All right, I've never seen this one.
I didn't want to have it follow directly on the heels of... We watched a few alien movies earlier in the month. But I think actually this one is like a good capper to everything we've considered this month. There's like little bits and pieces. There's just like a whole lot of people in this movie, and a lot of different ideas and visuals. And I think it'll be fun to talk about.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think it will be interesting. And Burton, I want to talk about just how much Tim Burton we've talked about on the show now, because I feel like this will be at least the third, maybe the fourth Tim Burton that you've assigned.
Yeah, I think it's officially the fourth, I guess, and arguably the fifth if you count the short film Vincent.
That's right. Yeah,
so there has been a lot of it.
That's all right though, because they've all been different, and I expect this one to be different too. So I'm looking forward to watching it and discussing it. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, listeners, for joining us on this extended look at the Ty West trilogy of slasher films.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Sometimes it's got to be a two-parter.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to go for it. You got to watch all three movies, and I'm glad we did. I'm glad we talked about it. And Brian, I will see you next week.
See you, everybody. Happy Halloween.